Figures that were kind of usually offered were $50,000 salary for a recruiter role. Hi everyone, my name is Rika and thank you so much for stopping by my channel again. So in today's video, I wanted to talk about how much I made on my first job in Canada. So I think this is an important topic to discuss because after school, I know a lot of persons who aspire to be international students in Canada do watch my videos, and then of course you want to get a job almost immediately after. So I wanted to provide some context as to, what might be your starting salary. Some industries and some companies, even if you are fresh out of school and you don't have that much experience, they are going to be paying you more. So the company, the industry, the years of experience that you would have had, the type of qualifications that you would have had, all of these things kind of gel into one in order to give you what your salary would look like, and also your negotiation skills. Some people are just able to negotiate a better salary, and that adds to their outcome. So I'm going to be deep diving in this video and just talking about my experience that would have kind of lit up the figures that were being thrown at me while I was looking for a job. Also just my experience that I would have had from back home and my experience that I would have had prior to this job in Canada. I'll get into that. And my schooling in Canada, my schooling from Jamaica. So if that is something that interests you, feel free to keep watching. If you like this content, feel free to give it a like. And if you think that it will be beneficial to someone, feel free to give it a share. Alright, so I came to Canada in 2018. I came New Year's Eve in 2018, and I started my studies in human resources management at Humber College in 2019. So January 2019 is when I began my studies. Prior to that, I have a bachelor's of arts in communication. So that kind of wraps up my educational background. My professional experiences, I was a teller at a bank in Jamaica, and then I worked in marketing I was at the bank for almost 3 years. So that kind of gives you some context to what work experience I would have had coming into this. I started looking for a job in June, so about 3 months before school ended, which would have been in August. And I was also doing an internship. My program had a mandatory internship, and I was doing it remote. It was fairly good. Do I think that it had all the human resources components that I would have needed? Probably not, but then it was also an internship. They really have to kind of spoon feed you and kind of get things out of the way and ensure that you are equipped as best as possible. So that's kind of that. Well, I applied to a lot of jobs. When I say a lot, like a lot of jobs, and for the most part I did get quite a few interviews. Some people ghosted me, but that's just kind of the numbers game that you play when you are doing a lot of applications. I would definitely advise that you apply for roles that are in companies that you do want to work for and are in fields that you want to work for. It really makes very little sense to apply for something that you have zero interest in. You're probably going to be unhappy, and then it just comes with a whole host of issues that you probably don't necessarily want to deal with. On the flip side of that, however, if you feel like this is the gateway to a company that you really want to work for, or a job that you really want to get to, you definitely can go ahead and apply for that position. So while I was going to interviews and etc., figures that were kind of usually offered was anywhere between 30,000 to 39,000, 40 to 45,000. Those are kind of the figures that were thrown at me at the time. When I was asked what my preferred range is, I would usually say 40 to 45,000 and I would prefer the latter. So you do want to put that out there on your applications. I will actually get into how much I did actually make. I'm just kind of telling you, giving you some backstory and telling you what the figures were going into it. I would like to also say this is my first job that I will be talking about. It's not, I've had 2 jobs since this job, which is kind of crazy because I've been working here for a little over 2 years, and that's also something that you want to be very strategic with your job changes and with the positions that you do accept, because you don't want to look like you're unstable and you're hopping from jobs to jobs to jobs. So you do want to be strategic. So if it is a situation where, for example, in the pandemic, I made a video how I lost my job. So it's not like I voluntarily switched that job, and that was also a blessing in disguise. That job was a great job. I really enjoyed that job, but I feel like it took me more so out of my comfort zone than I would have if the pandemic did not happen. So that happened, and then I went to another job and currently in a different job. But all of them have been such great experience, and I definitely feel like all of them have definitely added great value to my professional journey. So back to the interviewing. So I was interviewing from June all the way to September because I did land and start working in HR in September. So you can see that was a very long process. So this doesn't happen to everybody, and this does not happen to everybody, but because I was so eager and I was like sending out a lot of applications, sometimes I ended up at some interviews that it was very obvious that these people were, it quite likely was going to be like a multi-level marketing situation, which if that's your thing, you know, honestly, that's fine. That just wasn't where I was in my career. I'm still currently not necessarily there in my career, and that wasn't the type of positions that I was looking for. So when I would get to interviews and realize that that was the case, sometimes I would just leave. I wouldn't even bother go through with it because I know that we would realistically be wasting both of our times. If you feel like the salary is too low, be honest with yourself. I was doing an interview with a company, and in the screening, she made it clear that it would be, I believe she said it was 35,000 per annum, and then with bonuses, it could be up to 39,000. For me, I felt like that was too low. That was just honestly too low for me. So I decided that, you know, I wouldn't go through with the second step of the interview, and that was in August. So obviously I would still be going out there and trying to seek other opportunities. But that's in the world of job searching as well. You do have to understand the race is for those who can endure, indeed, because it can get very, very frustrating when you're going out there and you're constantly doing interviews and you're not necessarily getting the type of answers that you want. So at one point, I felt like turning down that salary was honestly a mistake, which is kind of crazy when I look back at it, because I was getting like nowhere, like no one was calling me back for like final interviews, and I wasn't really necessarily getting the type of figures that I would prefer to hear. So anyways, those interviews happened. Numbers that were thrown at me, as I mentioned, were, I think at one point, even a $30,000 salary for a recruiter role was offered, but I also declined that. I was really thinking about it at that time, to be honest. I'm going to be like very honest with you. I was really thinking about it because I still hadn't gotten a job, and I believe that was in September. So I was looking up for jobs from June all the way to September, and that was offered. I'm just like, should I just take this because it's clear no one else is responding to me. I would also like to say, I didn't do any type of any type of research for, you know, salaries in Jamaica, but some of the salaries that I am aware of colleagues and, you know, people who, you know, work in certain industries, I do think that a lot of the salaries in Canada are fairly comparable to the salaries in Jamaica. Some of them, obviously it depends on the person's qualifications as well as their experiences, so you just kind of want to keep that in mind. But some of the salaries, and I guess when I actually discuss my salary, you'll realize that, you know, it's fairly comparable with some people's salary. Not everybody's salary, but with some people's salary. All right, where was I? So yeah, that was offered and all that good stuff. So eventually I ended up getting some interviews that were of better, you know, salaries and all that type of stuff. I had reached out to a recruiting agency, and we were there talking, and I believe this is where my teller experience from back home kind of helped. So I was getting a position that was fairly similar to a teller position with a fairly large company, and their rate was going to be $22 per hour, and I believe it would, yes, that's about $45,000 per year. However, with that job, they mentioned that you'd get a lot of overtime because sometimes it does get that busy. So you'd have a lot of overtime. So you would be able to work upwards of 45,000 upwards. And as I mentioned earlier in this video, my range that I would always tell people was I wanted between 40 to 45 towards the tail end. So as you can imagine, like, that was very exciting. However, it was not it with the position that I wanted. It was more teller customer service based. And sometimes that's what you do have to do in order to get to the point where you are able to be in the position that you want to be in the company. Even during that interview, I explained to who would have been my manager if I had taken that position, that, you know, where I really want to be is within HR. And she did explain that, you know, you can come start off on this role and we can see where it goes. Now, at that same time, I was also being offered an HR administration role. Yeah, I was being offered an HR administration role, and that role was going for $20 an hour, and there was, how the other one had overtime, there was no overtime. It was just $20 an hour. That was just it. So that would have been $41,600 for the year, and I ended up taking that job. So my first job, the annual salary would be $41,600 for the year, and I know that that doesn't necessarily break it down as to how much you would make after tax every month, so I'm also going to do that math for you. So after tax, I was making $2,600 per month. I think everybody's tax situation might be a little different. I'm honestly not sure, but that was a ballpark figure of what I would be making each month. And just an FYI, I was paying $600 to $700 a month in taxes. taxes are a little fuzzy or whatever, so it could be a little different. It could be 2.6 for somebody, it could be 2 something else for somebody else, but basically for the most part that was the ballpark figure that I would get whenever I would be paid. So I stayed in that job for about 7 months, and as I said, extremely rewarding. And I didn't feel bad in terms of like I could have been making more money, and with overtime probably be making a lot more, but I also knew that this was a sacrifice that I had to make in order to have the better salary in the short future. So after that happened, then COVID happened, and when COVID happened, I really thought about it too, and I was like, if I had taken a customer service job, it would have been more difficult to find another job because my skill set wouldn't have been as specific as if I had gone into HR. Although customer service, hats off to you, especially depending on the industry, your skill set can be very, very niche, and only a select amount of people can do it, because the offer that I had gotten was within like a financial sector. So it would have been still pretty niche, and I still would have developed skill sets, and maybe I would have grown and had gone to the HR office in that company, but who knows. But anyways, long story short, I took the HR role, was making about $2.6 per month. That was about $20 an hour. So that was good. The pandemic happened, and then that job existed no more, and I shortly after took an HR job that was offered, and that was paying more, and then I left, and now I'm in another HR job. So sometimes, even though the salary and maybe the benefits package that we want isn't necessarily there, we do have to, it really is your life, it's your journey, you decide what's best for you. For me at that time, I felt like that was the most appropriate decision. And I also want to add context in terms of, I was getting paid that. I had no HR experience. I did do a 3-month internship, but I don't think that 3-month internship had the same amount of exposure that I would have needed to take on this job. So this company did, give me a chance. They did give me my first boss. They're really interested in my abilities, and they gave me a chance to, showcase my skills, which I did, and I am still fairly good with the people in that workspace. Like, we still talk, not like every day, but like, if there's anything professional that comes up, I'm still free to call them. They're still free to call me. So that was good. And you also want to keep your professional links very, very alive, very tight. You want to ensure that you are able to discuss, what the next steps in your career could be. And if they need anything, reach out to you for that. So I guess that kind of wraps it up. I spoke about what my qualifications were, what my experience was, a little bit about my interview experience and how I kind of got here, and then the actual salary that I made. As my first HR job, as I mentioned, I had no prior HR experience, and I only realistically had the 3-month internship, as well as I had my qualification from Humber. So you could be making that, you could be making more, you could be making less. To be honest, this is just to kind of give you some context. And I definitely know people in Jamaica who are, would be making the equivalent to 2,600 Canadian. I do live below my means in almost all aspects of my life. So at the time, that was appropriate for me, and I guess it was fairly within the range of what I was expecting, because when I did the research, that's kind of what the research spoke to in terms of what I would be making. So I kind of set up my life in that way where that was appropriate for me. So that's something that you also want to do in order to not run into issues. And I know there is a temptation of always going back home and having, a lot of gifts to give to people, but you do want to ensure that your financial footing is solid before you go ahead and venture out on that. That is my 2 cents. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I will see you in my next video.